Deep in the heart of the Appalachian forest, a silence reigns almost unnatural. The towering trees seem to whisper ancient secrets, their gnarled limbs twisting like fingers reaching out, searching. But it's not the trees that should make you uneasy. It's what hides beneath their shadow, what lurks in the quiet spaces, watching, waiting. You may hear the wind, the rustle of leaves, but you will never hear what truly waits for you. And what if it's not waiting to harm? What if it's waiting for something else? Something far more unsettling? What happens when those who wander too deep in these woods vanish, leaving only questions behind? In this story, we'll explore 3 chilling accounts that have haunted the mountains for decades. First, a hiker, a man prepared for the journey, who simply disappears. No sign of a struggle, no clue as to where he's gone. The only thing left behind is an abandoned campsite and a cryptic note that makes no sense. Then, a legend, a warning passed down through generations, about a place where the earth itself seems to hide its darkest truths. Something far worse than a story, something real. And finally, an encounter no one dares to talk about. A chilling event that twists the very fabric of reality, leaving those who experienced it questioning whether they truly ever escaped. What if these stories are not just stories? What if they are the echoes of something far darker than we can comprehend? Something buried beneath the forest floor, waiting to be discovered? What do you think happened? And, after hearing this, would you dare to step into the Appalachian forest, knowing that something watches, something that may never let you leave? The Appalachian Mountains stretch over 2,000 miles, their vast, undulating range sweeping across the eastern United States like a shadow cast over the land. Within their heart lies an impenetrable forest, dense with trees that stretch skyward, as though reaching for something or someone. These woods are not like any you've encountered before. The trees here don't just stand. They seem to sway, bend, and breathe, shifting as though alive. They murmur in the wind, their branches creaking under the weight of years that no one truly understands. This forest is older than any living memory, older than any man-made map could ever record. It is a place where time feels out of sync, where the moments of your life feel like whispers against the roar of an ancient world. Fog clings to the forest floor like a veil, thick and oppressive. It stifles the air, curling around the trunks of trees like fingers, hiding whatever lies just beyond your sight. In the early mornings, the mist rolls through the woods, so dense you can barely see the tip of your boot. You'll hear things that seem distant but close all at once. Soft whispers, the crackle of leaves, the snap of a twig breaking underfoot. But when you turn, nothing is there. Only the trees, swaying as though nothing had happened at all. The locals will tell you not to venture too far. They'll speak of the things that roam unseen, strange, unexplainable occurrences that no one dares to speak of aloud. Stories passed from mouth to mouth, warnings wrapped in a shroud of fear. They say the Appalachian forest is not just a wilderness. It's a realm where the normal rules of nature no longer apply. It is a place where the lost don't just disappear. They are taken. The woods are ancient, older than any civilization that dared to settle around them. But there's something darker in these trees, something that waits. And that waiting, it isn't as peaceful as you might imagine. Because, on this particular mountain, it's not the trees that are the most dangerous part. It's the way they guard the secrets buried beneath their roots. The way they seem to whisper for you to enter and never leave. People have ventured into these woods for generations, only to lose themselves in the vastness of it all. Some of them simply wander, not realizing they are drifting deeper into the mountain's heart, where the paths cease to exist, where the land itself seems to shift and warp. They follow trails that fade before their eyes, or they hear footsteps that aren't their own. And those who go too far, the ones who stray past the boundary of reason, well, they are never found. For some, it's as if they've been erased from existence. No footprints, no traces of where they've gone. No sound left behind but the hollow echoes of a place that forgets. These disappearances aren't merely tragic, they are mysterious, unexplainable, a part of the forest that takes what it wants, leaving only confusion and terror in its wake. And the ones who make it back, they returned changed. Silent, eyes wide and haunted. The kind of haunted look that says they've seen something. Something that doesn't belong. Something that won't let them go. One such disappearance happened in 2008. A man named Tom Strider set out alone to hike the Appalachian Trail. A seasoned outdoorsman, Tom had traversed these very mountains before. He was the kind of person who knew every step of the path, every turn in the trail, every crack in the earth that hinted at danger. The kind of person who felt more at home in the woods than in a bustling city. Tom planned a 3-day journey through the most remote parts of the Appalachian Trail, an adventure he'd undertaken countless times before. But when the 4th day came, his family received a phone call. It wasn't from Tom. Tom's family had been expecting him back, but the call they received wasn't reassuring. No comforting voice saying he'd made it safely, no quick check-in to let them know everything was fine. It was a voice they didn't recognize, a voice that sounded strained, as if it were trying to hide its panic. "I'm lost. I don't know where I am." The line crackled as Tom's words trailed off. And then, nothing. The phone went dead. That was the last anyone heard from him. The next morning, his family called the authorities. Search parties were formed. Local authorities scoured the forest, covering miles of rugged terrain, from the twisting trails to the thickest forest where the sun rarely touched. But no sign of Tom. Days turned into weeks, and yet, there was still no trace. His tent, food, and equipment were all accounted for at his campsite. But there was one thing that was missing: the man himself. The forest had swallowed him whole, without a trace, without even a single footprint left behind. There was no evidence of struggle, no signs of a bear attack, no indication that anything had happened to him at all. It was as if Tom had simply vanished from existence, absorbed by the woods. After weeks of searching, and with no sign of Tom, the local authorities gave up the hunt. There were no clues, no answers, only a sense of lingering dread. Some thought he must have wandered off the trail, gotten lost, or perhaps fallen into one of the deep ravines hidden among the mountain ridges. But what if it wasn't something so simple? What if the forest had taken him, but not in the way anyone expected? A local elder, an old man who had lived in these parts for most of his life, spoke in hushed tones when asked about the disappearances in the mountains. He was a man who had seen too much in his time, a man whose eyes always seemed to hold a secret. One evening, as the moon hung low in the sky, he told a tale to a small group of hikers gathered around a campfire. A tale of a wandering spirit that had existed in these woods for centuries. A spirit that had the power to trap those who strayed too far into the depths of the forest. This spirit, according to the elder, didn't take its victims in the way one might think. It wasn't the quick snap of death that claimed them. No, this spirit took its victims in a far more insidious way. This spirit was said to be a shapeless thing, an entity that existed between the cracks of time. It couldn't be seen with the eyes. No, it was felt. An oppressive weight on the chest, a cold breath against the skin, a sudden, unexplainable urge to wander deeper into the woods. Those who were taken by it were not killed immediately. They were lost, wandering forever within the labyrinth of the forest, trapped in a nightmarish cycle, unable to find their way back. It was as if the forest itself wrapped its roots around their souls, slowly eroding their sense of reality until all they could do was walk, aimlessly, for eternity. And the worst part? The elder said those who were lost didn't know they were lost. They thought they were walking to safety, but they were only walking further into the heart of the nightmare. What if Tom Strider had been one of those who had encountered this wandering spirit? What if, in the quiet of the woods, he'd felt that cold, invisible pull, drawing him further and further into the depths, where no one could hear his calls? What if he thought he was simply lost, but in reality, he was never going to be found again? The elder spoke of one other thing, a warning for those who dared venture too deep. He said, "If you hear the forest whispering your name, don't answer. If you follow the sound of the wind calling you, you'll find yourself never leaving." Tom Strider's fate remains a mystery. No one knows what happened to him in those woods. No one knows why he vanished without a trace. Some say it was the spirit of the forest, waiting for another lost soul to claim. Others believe it was simply a tragic accident, a man who got lost and succumbed to the wilderness. But there are those who believe, who know, that Tom wasn't lost. He was taken, and the woods never let go. So, the question remains, what truly happened to Tom Strider? Was it the wandering spirit, or something else that led him into the forest to never be seen again? And if you decide to walk the trails of the Appalachian forest, what might be waiting for you? Some claim to hear voices in the forest, whispers that come from deep within the trees, beckoning those nearby to follow. It's a phenomenon that has plagued hikers and campers for as long as the forest has stood. These voices don't come from any human, but seem to come from the very woods themselves, rising and falling with the wind. It happened to a woman named Sarah Miller in 2011. She was just an ordinary camper, someone who loved the peace of the forest and the solitude it offered. But what Sarah would experience that weekend would make her question everything she knew about the world. And it all began with a whisper. Sarah had arrived at Old Man's Bluff early that morning, excited for a weekend alone in the Appalachian wilderness. The peak, as locals called it, was known for its breathtaking views and its isolation. She'd been there before, but this time, something felt different. The air was heavier, thick with the kind of silence that seemed unnatural. As the day faded into evening, Sarah set up her campsite, lit her fire, and settled in for the night. But the tranquility didn't last long. It was around midnight when she first heard it. A soft sound carried on the wind, barely audible at first, like a distant murmur. At first, she thought it was just the wind, trees rustling, branches creaking in the night. But as she listened, the sound seemed to form words. Her name, Sarah. It was a quiet whisper, but it was unmistakable. Her heart skipped a beat. She called out, "Hello?" But the voice didn't answer. Instead, it came again. "Sarah, come closer." Sarah's first instinct was to brush it off. It had to be her imagination, right? A trick of the wind, or perhaps an animal mimicking a human voice. But the whispers didn't stop. They became more insistent, pulling at her like an unseen hand. "Sarah, come closer. We're waiting for you." The voice was soft but filled with an undeniable urgency, the kind that makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand on end. For a moment, she considered walking in the opposite direction, ignoring it altogether. But curiosity got the better of her, and she stood up, slowly making her way toward the source of the whispers. As Sarah walked deeper into the woods, the whispers followed her, growing louder and clearer with every step. She wasn't sure how long she had been walking, but by the time she realized how far she had gone, the darkness was almost absolute. The trees towered above her, their limbs twisting and weaving together, creating a canopy that blocked out the stars. The whispers weren't just calling her name anymore. They were guiding her, urging her forward, leading her somewhere she couldn't yet see. Every step she took felt like it was pulling her deeper into the forest, farther away from her camp, farther away from safety. But what could she do? She was already so far in, and the whispers, they were so persistent, almost comforting in their familiarity. Hours passed, and Sarah began to feel disoriented. The forest around her seemed to shift, as if the trees themselves were rearranging. What had once been familiar now felt foreign, unsettling. The whispers had become a constant presence, echoing in her mind, pushing her on. She stumbled through the underbrush, her senses dulling with exhaustion, until finally, she saw it. A structure in the distance. A cabin, hidden deep in the woods, where no path should have led. The cabin was old, decaying, even. Its wood was weathered, rotting away in places, as though it had been abandoned for years. But there it stood, right in front of her, bathed in the pale light of the moon. The door hung slightly ajar, creaking softly with the breeze. For a moment, Sarah stood frozen. The whispers had stopped, but the air around her was thick with anticipation. She felt a pull, a strange magnetism drawing her closer to the cabin. The door beckoned, like an invitation she couldn't refuse. She stepped forward, her heartbeat quickening with every step. As she approached the door, Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The moment she was just inches from the threshold, she saw it. A pair of eyes, wide open, staring back at her from the darkness inside. Not the eyes of a person, not human at all. These eyes were different, twisted, distorted, and contorted in a way that made her stomach churn. The face, or what might have been a face, was too unnatural to be anything of this world. It was a mass of distorted features, like something that had been hastily assembled from scraps of human flesh and something else. Frozen in place, Sarah couldn't tear her eyes away from the twisted face that watched her from the darkness. She tried to scream, but her voice caught in her throat. The face, if you could even call it that, seemed to pulse, its grotesque features twisting in an endless loop, as though it were trying to force itself into some semblance of humanity. And just as quickly as it had appeared, it vanished, swallowed back into the darkness of the cabin. The whispers returned, now sharp and frantic. Leave now." The air around her turned cold, a biting chill that crept beneath her skin. Sarah didn't wait to see what else would emerge from the shadows. She turned and ran, her feet pounding the earth beneath her, her heart racing in her chest. She didn't stop until she reached her camp, until the sounds of the forest faded into the distance. But even then, she couldn't escape the images in her mind. The eyes, the face, the whispers that had followed her, urging her forward into that cabin, into that nightmare. Sarah left Old Man's Bluff the next morning and never returned. She couldn't explain what had happened, what she had seen, but she knew one thing for sure. She had been touched by something that wasn't meant to be seen. Do you believe it was a warning, or just a trick of the mind? Could it have been something else entirely? A hallucination? A mirage conjured by exhaustion and isolation? Or is there something far darker lurking in those woods? Something that speaks in whispers, something that calls, waiting for the next person to listen. Let me know your thoughts. Do you think Sarah's encounter was just a trick of the forest, or something far worse? One of the most unsettling legends to haunt the Appalachian Mountains is that of the Skinwalker. This tale is not new. Locals have whispered about these creatures for generations, passing down stories of a shapeshifter that lurks in the shadows of the woods, a being that can assume any form, that mimics human voices, the sounds of animals, and even the very rustling of the trees. A creature that can blend seamlessly into the natural world, becoming something that is both part of the forest and yet something entirely unnatural. A creature that exists between the cracks of what's real and what's not. What happens when something wears the face of a human but isn't human at all? And what happens when it decides to mimic you? In 1999, a group of friends, young, curious, and unaware, decided to spend a weekend camping in the heart of the Blue Ridge Mountains, a place famous for its beauty and its solitude. They had no idea that they would soon come face to face with something that would change them forever. They set up camp near an old stone foundation, remnants of a forgotten building that had long since crumbled into nothing but rock and debris. It was an isolated spot, perfect for their weekend getaway, far from the hustle and bustle of city life. They spent the first day hiking, enjoying the peacefulness of the forest, the beauty of nature. But as evening fell, a sense of unease began to settle over the group. The woods, which had seemed so inviting earlier, now felt oppressive. And it wasn't just the darkness that made it feel so wrong. It started slowly at first. The sounds, footsteps that didn't match the rhythm of nature. Their campsite was far from any main trails, yet they began to hear the faintest rustling, the unmistakable sound of footsteps, too deliberate, too unnatural to belong to a deer or a bear. These were human steps, but there was something off about them. They weren't the kind of steps you would hear from someone on the move. They were too slow, too calculated. Every night, after they'd huddled around the fire, the noises seemed to grow closer. Then, the voices started. Soft at first, whispers from somewhere just beyond the reach of the firelight. They called out, but not to any of the friends directly. They called out to each other. "Mark, Hope, help me." Voices that didn't belong to anyone in the group, yet echoed their names. At first, the group tried to brush it off, blaming the wind or wild animals. But as the days went on, it became impossible to ignore. The footsteps grew louder. The voices grew clearer, more insistent. And then came the scratching, low and rhythmic, like claws dragging across the tense fabric in the dead of night. Hope, the bravest of the group, decided to venture out one night to investigate, convinced that it was just some animal, perhaps a raccoon, perhaps something else. She took a flashlight, her heart pounding in her chest as she stepped away from the campfire, her mind playing tricks on her with every snap of a twig underfoot. But what she found wasn't what she was expecting. As she crept through the woods, trying to make sense of the strange sounds, she saw something in the distance. A figure, standing still at the edge of the trees. At first, she thought it was one of the others, perhaps Mark or Jake, trying to scare her. But as she approached, her blood ran cold. The figure wasn't moving like a person. It was too still, too unnatural. It wasn't even standing correctly. The shape seemed to twist, as though its body didn't quite know how to hold itself together. It was wrong. The closer Hope got, the more she realized something was terribly wrong. The creature, if it could be called that, was standing on all fours, its legs too long, its limbs bending at strange angles. It was dressed in what appeared to be tattered human clothes, but there was no mistaking what she was seeing. The figure wasn't a person. It was something far worse. It was an animal pretending to be a person, or, worse still, a person trying to pass itself off as an animal. The creature twisted its body in an unsettling manner, its face contorted in a grotesque parody of humanity. As Hope froze, it suddenly turned its head and looked directly at her. Its eyes dark, hollow, and unblinking. And then, it spoke. But it wasn't just any voice. It was the voice of Hope's best friend, calling out to her in a mocking tone. "Hope, help me, please come closer." The words came from the creature's mouth, but they didn't belong to it. They were Hope's words, but twisted, distorted. The creature, whatever it was trying to mimic her voice, just like the legend said it would, trying to trick her into coming closer, into letting her guard down. But something inside Hope screamed at her to run. She turned and fled, her heart racing in her chest, her mind screaming with terror. The group was already on edge when Hope returned to the campsite, her breath ragged, her eyes wide with fear. She told them what she had seen, how the creature had mimicked her voice, how it had stood in the darkness, waiting. But it wasn't over. The night seemed to stretch on, with more strange noises and more mimicked voices calling from the shadows. Then, the next morning, as the group tried to pack up and leave, they discovered something they couldn't explain. One of their friends, Mark, was missing. His tent was still there, his gear untouched. But Mark was gone. In his place, lying motionless in the dirt near the campsite, was a body, a twisted body. His eyes were wide open, as if frozen in a state of terror, his skin pale and lifeless. And carved into his chest, deep into the flesh, was a strange symbol, a pattern that none of them recognized, but one that seemed ancient, dark, as though something had marked him, claimed him as its own. Was it a skinwalker, the creature that had stalked Hope and the others? Or was it something far terrible, something older and more primal? The skinwalker legend speaks of a creature that wears the skins of humans, that tricks the unwary into trusting it. But the twisted symbol on Mark's chest seemed to tell a different story. A story of something far more terrifying, something that had marked him as a victim in its twisted, ancient game. What do you think happened? Let me know your thoughts. We've heard the stories, the eerie encounters that seem to transcend the bounds of mere chance. Tom Strider, who disappeared without a trace on a trail he knew so well. Sarah Miller, who followed the whispers of a voice in the woods only to find herself standing at the edge of something monstrous. And the group of friends who stumbled across something far more terrifying than any of them could have imagined. A creature that mimicked their voices, calling them into the night. But are not just the urban legends or the strange occurrences that make the Appalachian forests so terrifying. No, what truly sets this place apart is the land itself. The land is old, older than any of us can truly comprehend. The very earth beneath our feet has been here for millennia, long before the first settlers arrived, long before the forests were tamed by human hands. In the deepest, most isolated parts of these mountains, there's a power that runs through the land, a force that is as ancient as the trees, as old as the hills themselves. Native tribes that once lived in these very woods spoke of spirits that inhabited the earth. Spirits that weren't just watching over the land. They were part of it. These spirits, they said, could control the forest. They could make the trees bend, make the winds howl, and make the ground shift. And if you wandered too far into their domain, you risked becoming one with the forest. You risked becoming part of the ancient, living thing that lay beneath it all. So, the question remains, what happens to those who vanish in the Appalachian Mountains? Is it just the work of an ancient force that punishes the disrespectful? Or is there something more? Something we haven't even begun to understand? The darkness in the forest, the whispers in the trees, and the creatures that move in the night are all part of a mystery that may never be solved. But one thing is certain. The Appalachian forest holds secrets, dark, ancient, and deeply disturbing. And once you enter its depths, it may never let you leave. As we come to the end of our journey through the dark and mysterious Appalachian forest, the question still lingers. What do these stories mean? Are they simply the product of overactive imaginations, wild tales told by those who wander too far into the wilderness? Or is there something far darker, something far older, that waits for those who dare to enter? Something that the trees remember, something that lives in the whispers of the wind and the shadows that move just beyond the reach of the light. Think about it. The voices that call you deeper into the woods. The creatures that mimic your loved ones. The ones that move in the dark. The woods are not silent, not at peace. They're full of echoes, full of memories that refuse to stay buried. And what happens to those who vanish in the mountains? Where do they go? Are they lost to the wilderness, swallowed by the earth? Or are they trapped in a nightmare, forever walking among the trees, pulled into the depths by forces they couldn't have comprehended? I can't answer these questions for you. No one can. But that's the beauty and the horror of these stories. They leave us with a haunting sense of unease, a lingering question that can never quite be answered. Perhaps that's how the forest keeps its power over us, by making us question what we know, by forcing us to confront the unknown. Have you ever encountered something like this? A voice in the dark? A creature that shouldn't exist? A whisper that won't let you go? Maybe it's all in our heads, just the overactive imaginations of those who venture too far into the wild. Or maybe, just maybe, there's something else, something far darker, hiding just beneath the surface of the forest. Something that waits for the next person to wander too close, to listen to the whispers, to lose themselves in the shadow of the trees. Now it's your turn. Leave your thoughts, your theories, or your own creepy experiences in the comments below. Let's see if we can piece together the mystery of what's really going on in those woods. Maybe you've seen something, heard something, or felt that same strange pull that draws people in. Maybe you have a story of your own, one that could shed light on the darkness we've uncovered. We want to hear from you, because these woods are far from empty, and the stories are far from over. If you enjoyed this journey into the unknown, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this video with your friends. You wouldn't want to keep these stories to yourself, would you? After all, the forest is waiting. And who knows? Maybe it's already calling you.